Thanks so much for having me. I'm Zack Shapiro. I'm a lawyer, Bitcoiner, and investor in the Bitcoin venture ecosystem.
Nice, nice. So, Zach, on the Bitcoin source, we usually ask people a series of like 5 or 6 questions. My first question to you is, and I usually ask every guest this that comes on the show, which is, during your Orange Pill journey, your Bitcoin journey, were there any books, courses, or even people in the space that inspired you to kind of gain sources of your Bitcoin knowledge?
Sure. I think some of the resources that were really helpful for me were Jeff Booth's book, The Price of Tomorrow. I think that frames the problem that Bitcoin solves really succinctly, talking about how we sort of live in a naturally deflationary world where we have central banks around the world fighting that with inflationary money, and that system is sort of just set up to fail, to have huge credit busts over time, and that we really need a type of money that fits the actual technological economy that we have. There's not every part of the Bitcoin standard that I love, but I think some of that discussion around the history of money is a really helpful way of framing things. Humans moving from commodity money to token monies, and some of those token monies were really successful, like gold and silver. Some were less successful, like seashells and glass beads. And where Bitcoin fits into that story of the evolution of money. And then, one of my favorite resources now, I really love Preston Pish's show on the Investors Podcast Network. Every Wednesday, they have a bunch of my friends on, and it's a terrific resource.
So, Zach, my next question is one that I kind of wanted to ask you, just looking at your background, looking at, what you do on your day to day. So I'm aware that you're an attorney by day. And, a lot of people can be flummoxed about law, about, kind of how that process works. And my question to you is, as an attorney, is it ethical for you to accept Bitcoin as, payment for legal fees?
Sure. And I do that all the time. As an attorney, you can accept whatever you want. You can accept dollars, Bitcoin, chickens, in some cases stock in your client, which I also sometimes do. There are some legal ethics rules about, giving advice on something where you have a direct economic stake that you need to be careful of. That's not really so much a problem with Bitcoin. In the rest of the crypto sphere, if you're getting paid in tokens from a crypto issuer and you're also trying to give a third-party opinion about, for example, is that crypto token a security, that can occasionally get dicey. But Bitcoin really doesn't have that problem.
Yeah, and that actually, I'm glad you brought that up because it actually leads to my next question. SEC is trying to do with Bitcoin and kind of having this battle back and forth with Ethereum and some of the other altcoins on what is a commodity, what is a security. So in your humble opinion, what do you believe Bitcoin is?
Oh, I think at this point, it's incredibly clear that, it depends in what context you're talking about. Bitcoin is not yet legal tender in the United States, but in terms of what I would just say it is from a layman's perspective, I think it's a form of money. It's a monetary asset. In terms of the appropriate regulatory body, there's clearly established, at least policy, if not statutory law at this point, that Bitcoin is a commodity rather than a security. And it might be helpful to talk about what the difference between those two is. And then for tax purposes, it's property. So it really depends whether you're talking to the CFTC, which regulates commodities, they think about Bitcoin the commodity, or you're talking to the IRS about taxes, where they think of Bitcoin as property. But I don't think there are any lawyers or regulators in the space who seriously consider the idea that Bitcoin itself is a security.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that, that's kind of a debate that we've been having in the ecosystem for quite some time. You see Michael Saylor talking about it. You see Lynn Alden talking about it. Everybody's trying to get clear-cut regulation on what this exactly is. And I think personally, I agree with you. I think that it's a commodity. I think that it's a form of digital property that you can pass on generationally. You can use it as a digital asset. It's just kind of getting some of the, older people in the space, some of the older financial institutions in the space to really get on board and understand how great of a digital asset Bitcoin truly is.
Yeah, and I think the way to illustrate the difference between Bitcoin and a lot of this other stuff, the big question in crypto right now that doesn't apply as much to Bitcoin is which of those other things are securities? And that's a much more interesting question than Bitcoin, which I think is pretty clearly settled. But whether or not a specific offer and sale of an asset is an investment contract or a security under U.S. law is governed by the Supreme Court case from 1946 called the Howey test. And basically the Howey test asks, all right, if you're selling some kind of asset, doesn't matter what the asset is. The original Howey case was about orange groves. Their case is about whiskey casks. And now people are applying this to all sorts of different cryptocurrencies. And you sell that asset. You ask first, why are people buying it? Are they buying it to use it? Right, which is called consumptive utility. That's why you hear a lot of crypto tokens refer to themselves as utility tokens, or are they buying it in the expectation of profit? And I would say in the case of most crypto assets. People are buying it hoping number will go up more than they have a pressing need to use it actually as like a subway token. And then the question is, right, there's some things that you buy, to make an investment, right? If I buy a rare pair of Nike sneakers, I might be buying that to flip them and get a higher price for it, but that's not a securities offering. So what's the difference between buying, Nike sneakers to flip them, which is not a securities offering, and buying Nike stock, which is there some particular group of people that need to go out there and do efforts in order to make your investment pay off? So if I'm selling the Nike sneaker, there's no one that needs to do anything to make my shoes more valuable. It's just about the market structure for sneakers. There just needs to be someone who values it more than me who will pay a higher price. Whereas with Nike stock, there's a company out there, a particular group of people, Nike Inc., and they have to do work in order to make my stock more valuable tomorrow than it is today. If you apply that to Bitcoin, there's not a Bitcoin company. There's no CEO of Bitcoin, right? The team, the leader behind the project, not only are he, they, she no longer involved, we don't even know who Satoshi is, right? And so to the extent that Bitcoin will be more valuable in the future, that arguably doesn't take anyone's efforts because Bitcoin is just an asset. It just is what it is. We don't necessarily need new features for it to be useful. But even to the extent that there are people like the incredible core devs who are adding things to Bitcoin to make it more valuable, there's no particular group of people we're relying on. It's an open source project. It goes through peer review. You need the miners to sign off. The miners aren't all working together. The devs aren't all working together. It really truly is a decentralized project. I think if you compare that to the other crypto things out there, many of them really just look like startups. And there's nothing wrong necessarily with startups, but if your startup is going to do well, if you're going to create a use case for your utility token, oftentimes that will require the work of a specific company. And that's what you're seeing at issue, for example, in the Ripple case right now, where the SEC is in court arguing that Ripple Labs, the company behind XRP, was basically pitching XRP as an investment that they would do work to make valuable. And that's really sort of at the heart of what the securities law is trying to get after.
Exactly. And a lot of these alternative coin companies are, they're getting these coins at the pre-mine stage, which kind of causes a whole lot of other issues. And, what I love about Bitcoin is that, it can't be capitulated. It can't be manipulated. Like you said, there's no CEO. So this is things that I think the audience, the world needs to realize about Bitcoin because there's so much FUD out there. And I really respect your legal expertise on some of these things. My next question to you is, Zach, is as a legal fellow at the Bitcoin Policy Institute, there's a lot of issues with Bitcoin and self-custody. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there's a privacy key disclosure law being sent out for in the Senate in Wyoming. Are you familiar with that?
Not that state law in particular, but I think self-custody and Bitcoin privacy are critically important issues, and definitely things that BPI is committed to and taking a strong look at.
Yeah, and I kind of want to unpack that a little bit more, just like from a Bitcoiner's perspective. So like you being an attorney, let's just say, for example, you have a client that has, private keys and they have a warrant or they get their house raided and law enforcement, accesses those keys or seizes those keys. Like as far as the courts go and the laws go, do they have the right to take those keys and do they have the right to access those keys?
It would certainly depend on the circumstance. If they had a warrant to seize the Bitcoin, then yes. And there are cases of that out there happening. But, it's really like any other bearer instrument. It'd be like if you had, as a decentralized commodity, it would be the same if you had gold bars in a safe, right? And could they get the combination to the safe and open it and seize it? Yeah, if they have a court order that allows them to do so, they could. Now, with Bitcoin, one of the unique things, it's if you set it up correctly, especially with geographically separated multi-sig, it's much, much harder to confiscate than gold bars in a safe are, right? Because you can just remove someone from their house. And if you have to drill a hole in the safe, you can drill a hole in the safe and get the gold out. It's very hard to do a, perhaps global scavenger hunt to find a 3 of 5 multi-sig. So practically, they may not be able to, but in terms of the sort of legal specifics here, it's the same as anything else. It's just property, like any other property.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm glad you brought that up. Multi-sig is very important, guys. Ladies and gentlemen out there, you have companies like Casa. There's a lot of other companies out there.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. There's tons of them out there, and they're giving you the option to not just have your eggs in one basket, like Zach said.
Yeah, one of the companies I work with in the Bitcoin space I'm particularly excited about is also going to roll out the first Bitcoin self-custody insurance, which is going to be really awesome. And I don't know how many details I can share about that now, but look out for a company called Anchor Watch. It's an amazing team, and they're going to have some really cool offerings to make self-custody less scary if insurance is a concern you have.
Last question. Where do you think the future of NFT law and regulation is headed in the future?
Yeah, I think that's a difficult question because of all of the things in the crypto space, NFTs are the most diverse, right? So I think Bitcoin represents a fundamental revolution in technology and money in that it's the first instance of truly distributed, digitally native, scarce money. And NFTs are sort of the next step, much more sort of experimental. I'm not sure they've proven themselves even conceptually in the same way Bitcoin has, but they're moving that idea one step forward to say, okay, Bitcoin has created digitally native money, but what if we used blockchain tokens, whether they're on the Bitcoin network or some other blockchain network, and we use them to represent some other arbitrary asset, whether that asset is real estate, whether that asset is some claim on a digital piece of art, whether it's stock in a company, whether it's just your hotel key card. And so I think you can tell from the examples I was giving, these things that NFTs represent, anything from a collectible, a key card, all the way up to real estate or equity in a company or DAO, as more often happens in the crypto space, those are hugely different activities that I think are appropriately regulated very different from each other. So if you're launching an NFT that just serves as a token to let you into your hotel room that effectively disappears or is disabled at the end of your hotel stay, that probably doesn't need a ton of hardcore regulation around it. Whereas if we're rebuilding the stock market on the blockchain and we're using NFTs to represent stock certificates that you use to vote at company shareholder meetings or to receive dividends, that probably is something that will merit stronger regulation. So I think, right now NFTs is this buzzword. There's this sort of crazy market for NFTs where people are paying $1 million for a cartoon of a monkey. And I think we need to kind of work some of that silliness out of the system. But my guess is eventually regulators will catch on to NFTs are not a monolith. To the extent that they have promise and are going to move the ball forward, they're going to move the ball forward in very different ways for different industries. So I think the regulation on NFTs will be specific to each sort of use case that NFTs end up getting used for, which, at least in my view, is a little bit hard to tell right now where, if anywhere, NFTs will find product market fit.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest issues that we're seeing now is like the fungibility aspect, where with Bitcoin, when you're talking about fungibility, one Bitcoin is always going to equal one Bitcoin. And when you have NFTs and you have some of these other things that can be, they say that it can't be duplicated, but it's essentially a JPEG. It's essentially an image frozen in time out there in cyberspace. And as we've seen with some of these other exchanges that are doing NFTs, there's a lot of hacks. There's a lot of issues with people having the rights to those NFTs and keeping them secure. So I think that Bitcoin, I don't know if you're familiar, Zach, but there's a company called Rare Toshi where they do Bitcoin NFTs. It's not as big as some of the other commonplace NFT things you see out there now. But I think as Bitcoin evolves, as the space gets bigger, and people get a better understanding, like you said, of what an NFT actually is and its potential, Bitcoin hopefully can fix some of those fungibility issues and some of those security issues that we're seeing now with NFTs.
Yeah, I'm really excited for Bitcoin NFTs to get bigger. I hope that industry gets larger. I would love to see better user interface on stuff like Counterparty. I think Scarce City is a really cool place to go and see where the Bitcoin NFT energy is right now. The Pepe project, right, being the sort of first NFTs in the space, all the way from Junseth and the Bitcoin Uncensored podcast to the fake rares that they're making today are very cool. And one of the projects I find most interesting in that space now, I apologize, I actually don't know who started it. It's called Ordinals. And what they're doing, you're familiar with it? They do this really cool thing. They are basically putting a unique serial number on every Satoshi on the Bitcoin blockchain. And what you can do with that then is look at historical UTXOs, right? So I want this coin that Hal Finney had, and I'm going to use that to make an artwork where, it's a picture of Hal Finney, but there's an open dime on it, and it has some of Hal Finney's original Bitcoin that he once owned. And I think collectible UTXOs is sort of an interesting next step I would love to see in the Bitcoin NFT world.
In the Bitcoin space, we'll just use environmental climate change, for example. There's companies out there, what they're doing is essentially they're trying to create green renewable Bitcoin, which kind of puts a label on Bitcoin because Bitcoin's supposed to be anonymous. So my question is, will we have a case in the future where you have quote unquote flagged Bitcoin versus unflagged Bitcoin, and will that make a determination on your NFT or some of the other products that you hold? If you have something that's flagged, will that diminish the fungibility and the net worth of the total asset, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important question. And despite what I just said about thinking that collectible UTXOs are cool, I think in general, it is critically important for the health of the Bitcoin network that we preserve fungibility along the asset. And so anytime people start talking about green Bitcoin, or in the case of Marathon, the mining company was talking about OFAC compliant blocks, I think that's a really dangerous road to go down. look, if we want to regulate Bitcoin's environmental impact, and there's of course a fierce debate about that and whether that makes sense or is necessary is going to work. But even if that is something you want to do, I think a much more efficient way is to go to the miners and say, if you have miners in your jurisdiction, your government, hey, we're going to regulate what energy you can use, right? We want more renewables, we want whatever. Actually regulating the Bitcoin that is created from certain energy sources, I think, is absolutely the wrong way to go about that, and is going to create a weird system where it's going to be hard to tell whether the quote unquote clean Bitcoin or dirty Bitcoin is going to be worth more. But the analog to this is in certain countries that have a weak currency or don't have their own currency and are using paper dollars. There are some cases where a dirty dollar bill or a dollar bill that has a little tear in it or was folded, has crease on it, is worth less than a clean dollar bill. And I think that's like not good for the dollar. And I think once we start talking about instead of blacklisting addresses, because we say, okay, this address belongs to a bad actor, or making, regulations about what kind of energy you can use, right? We don't want you to burn X amount of coal. If instead we just say, oh, this Bitcoin over here that was created, these UTXOs are evil UTXOs, no matter who they belong to, I think that's basically an attack on the network that we really want to avoid. 100%.
Zach, once again, I really, really respect your opinion, your insight on Bitcoin. You're a plethora of knowledge. So last thing for the audience, give people the ability to contact you on social media and also what other projects you have in the future.
Sure. So easiest way to find me, I spend way too much time on Clubhouse, and my handle there is @VentureCounsel, VentureCounsel. Similar to my Twitter handle, except I didn't snag the correct spelling of that, so it's the same thing without the E at the end. So it's Venture Counsel without the E. And then, probably easiest way to find me is shoot me a Twitter DM. And especially if you're out there building something in the Bitcoin ecosystem, whether it's a venture-backed startup or some sort of open source project, I'm really, that's what I most love working on, helping people do fundraising, build companies. I think that's going to be the next step in the Bitcoin journey. And the thing I'm most excited about is helping people build the products and services that will both make Bitcoin more useful and easier to bring into lives of people who are not involved in Bitcoin now.
Thank you, Zach, for taking time out to be on the Bitcoin Source. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks so much for having me.
Bye.
Bye.